everyone, this is Pepperfish and I'm back finally with a new podcast. I'm hoping that this will stay fairly short, but I do have a few things to actually get through. And again, really, I'm going to be talking about stories that I tend to wish I could avoid, but alas, most of the time I don't realize that it's going to be this type of story until I'm reading it. And I'm stuck actually reading it or watching it sometimes, but mostly I'm thinking about books in this case. So, of course, I was thinking about this when I was doing my other podcast, when I talked about storylines that I tend to avoid. And what usually happens, of course, is that afterwards I think of more storylines, but really these are a little different. Like I said, they tend to happen mostly when I don't realize they're going to happen. So, first of all, one of the stories I wish I could avoid is stories about the main character who, for whatever reason, usually not their fault, even though it totally is their fault, they are somewhere new or they're dealing with new people and they are there under false pretenses or they have some sort of false identity. And okay, honestly, I usually don't mind when a story is about, say, a con artist who is going and they're doing their thing. I don't worry about them so much because, they can handle that crap, okay? But seriously, when you have some random Joe Schmo and there's some sort of misunderstanding and they let it slide, they don't try to correct people because they're too freaking weak and whatever, or they use it to their advantage, and seriously, I hate stories like that, and for a couple of reasons. Usually because there's some sort of, anxiety that you keep hearing about, like, because the person is worried that they're going to be exposed, and there's all these little shenanigans that happen. You're just like, I don't care, dude, just tell people the truth, for goodness sakes. And the other reason why I dislike stories like these, particularly, is because of the reveal, okay? So usually you have a big reveal at some point where it comes, out in the open to everyone that you are totally lying or you're a freaking idiot, and you spend, I'm talking about the main character, of course, this poor main character has to spend the rest of the third act or whatever repairing or being true and, sort of righting the wrongs and all this BS. So, a perfect example of this, like I said, started off with a book that I thought was going to be really good. When I was younger, I totally loved Barbara Michaels, and I seriously, tried to read every single one of her books. But there's this one particular book called The Gray Beginning, and I started it. And it's essentially about a girl who had eloped with this, rich Italian guy, and they went to America, and his family didn't like her and all this BS, so they eloped. Well, he ends up dying, but she is not actually certain that he died. So she goes back to Italy and goes to his family to try and figure out if he's still alive. And, of course, the mother or the grandmother, of the guy, greets her, but for whatever reason comes to have this misunderstanding that the main character might be pregnant, she got pregnant right before he died, and she totally goes with it, if I recall correctly. And so, of course, the moment I read that, I was like, no way. She is not going to freaking try to stay at this house that she's unwelcome at by lying about her being pregnant, when she's not pregnant. It was, the moment I read that, I was so annoyed. I put the book down, which is what I usually do. Finally came back to it a very long time later, finished it, was happy to find out that she actually did not have the big annoying reveal. There's actually a certain point where the main character sort of tells herself, well, I'm pretty certain that the grandmother or the mother, whatever she was, knew that I was lying. She kind of tells herself she knows that I'm lying, so it's not that big a deal. And I was just, in the end, I was spared the big reveal. But for the most part, it's not one of my favorite books out of all of the Barbara Michael books out there. So another storyline that I really dislike, and Seriously, okay. It is when you have stories where the main character has some sort of goal in mind and you become invested in the goal. You know, as the reader, you're like, yes, this is really important. They need to get this done. And then the freaking main character gets kidnapped by pirates. Okay, and seriously, that happened in a book that I'm going to talk about in a second. But for the most part, the storyline that I dislike is when you have a goal, a main character, and the main character gets sidetracked. Okay, so for example, the first thing that always comes to my mind when I think of this type of story is a book called Cushel's Chosen. It is a part of the Cushel Legacy series by Jacqueline Carey, and I read the first book. It was really good, and so of course I started the second book, which is Cushel's Chosen. And here you have a main character who basically finds out when she goes to this one city, and it takes place during sort of an alternative universe, but it's like the Renaissance time period. And she goes to this city, which you would kind of think of as a city-state in Italy, and finds out that the main antagonist, this crazy woman from the first book, is now hiding out in the city. And so she has this goal that she needs to expose this old antagonist, right? She seriously gets kidnapped by pirates, okay? It blew my mind. And these books, okay, they are not short. So we're a good way through the book. You have all this build-up, and you're like, okay, this is going to be round 2 between the main character and this antagonist. No. Seriously, she gets kidnapped by pirates. Well, technically she gets taken off to prison. She tries to escape, finds herself in the ocean, and the pirates sort of capture her. But, you know, I held out a little bit of hope that she might still somehow get her freedom immediately and somehow return and get back to business, okay? No. The majority of the book is her with these pirates for a while and then slowly making her way back to that city-state. And I was so mentally blown. Again, when I realized, you know, because there was that moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, she really is not going to go back immediately. I'm seriously going to have to go through this whole book waiting for her to actually get back to what she was supposed to be doing. And again, I put it down, had to come back to it a little bit later, worked my way through it. And admittedly, it did have a payoff because she definitely took care of business when she finally made her way back, and she did have a wonderful reunion with her lover and all that crap. But at the same time, the book was freaking painful. And when half of the book is painful to the reader, that's just, you know, it's just not good, okay? So another story that sort of falls in this vein is actually one that I had to read for college. It is one of the original Arthurian tales from Chrétien de Troyes. I'm probably mispronouncing that horribly. From the 12th century, and one of the famous Arthurian tales is about Percival and the quest for the Holy Grail. And again, it's a story where he's on this quest to go and find the frickin' Holy Grail. And the whole frickin' story, which, as far as I recall, has no ending. He continually gets sidetracked, and there's very famous passages about the Fisher King, and there's so much debate about the symbolism of the Fisher King and all of that stuff. It's a fairly famous tale, or famous part of the Arthurian legend, but at the same time, I was so annoyed reading it, because, you know, there's a point where I'm like, oh, he's going to go out and find the Grail and, you know, work towards that. No, seriously, he continually gets sidetracked. So, in the end, this particular type of storyline obviously is one that I dislike, and I'm annoyed when I encounter it, but it's somewhat related to my last one. My last really annoying storyline that I'm often confronted with, and, you know, sort of really wish that I didn't always have to read stories like this, is basically when you have a story where a character, for many different reasons, will become passive, and they won't be an active participant in their own lives, like actually trying to either educate themselves or get better or defeat the bad guy or what have you. there are certain times, and I'm specifically talking about Harry Potter here, okay? There are certain times when our main character just was passive, and it's very annoying to read about because I want my characters to be active. I want them to take care of business. If you couldn't tell from my last other storyline that I dislike, I want my characters to take care of business. So the prime example from the Harry Potter series, of course, is Book 5, Order of the Phoenix, and I completely understand why Harry would be reacting badly considering what happened at the end of the 4th book. I can see why he would be at the perfect age where he would, act like a freaking punk. But at the same time, he was basically going through the whole woe is me and this is all happening to me, and he wasn't really doing anything. And I think we can all agree that when he was, i.e. him working with the others to do Dumbledore's army, and finally at the end when he, they all went off to the Ministry of Magic, all of that, when they were actually doing things, was the best parts of that book. So I think most of us would agree on that, but seriously, I can't stand a story when you just have a character who just will not take care of business. A small potential follow-up, you could say, of that in Harry Potter, of course, is in book 7. Again, I think most people would agree that the beginning part of that book is frustrating when, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are running around in the forests of England and they're not actually figuring anything out. And it's not until, honestly, the best part in the book for me, partially, not completely the best part, but one of them is when Ron freaking comes back and they get the sword and now it's down to business. And then from that point on, they take care of business. Okay. Love that. I love it when characters take care of business, and it just doesn't always happen. Okay. Sometimes you just get some really, really passive main characters, and it's very frustrating. So again, these are just storylines that frustrate me when I'm reading, and can't really avoid them because you're never really quite certain. It's not always very clear when you're reading the blurb of a book. But yeah, that's just, a few more storylines. They were on the top of my head, so I decided to podcast about them really quickly. And that's about it, and I hope everyone has a good weekend.